Good afternoon, and welcome to the University of the Philippines College of Music. We are honored and proud that this year's Congress of the Southeast Asian Directors of Music is done in our school, since we are also celebrating the 99th year of our foundation as a national music institution. I wholeheartedly thank Professor Bernard Lanskey of Buenconsejo Conservatory of Music in Singapore, SEADOM, founder, Associate Professor Dr. Sugri Charancho of the College of Music, Mahidol University, Bangkok, and his staff, especially Dr. Joseph Bowman. If music is money, then music is about exchange. By saying that music is money, I do not mean that music is a commodity, which is a thing sold and bought in the market for individual profit or for corporate accumulation of wealth. In saying music is money, I mean that it is more importantly, fundamentally about exchange, but we have to be quite keen in understanding that this concept of exchange I am referring to here has to be taken in a deep human sense. For what is the worth of money if there is no solidarity in exchange, nor social justice? Similarly, what if music, if it cannot communicate about ourselves and of our neighbors? When I say that music is money, I refer therefore to how music, like language, is simply the carrier of culture. Without language nor money, communication, cultural exchange, and human solidarity cannot be forged. With money, just like the words of language, we are able to convert the contents of our social experience, intentions, desires, and purposes into a value, into a currency, or simply put, into pattern sound symbols of our feelings for life that music is. That we will then have to be understood by the contracting parties. Is it possible to have this music exchange in Southeast Asia, where a diversity of peoples with their particular traditions live? Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is possible, and I believe that SEADOM, our gathering at this very moment, is precisely a step towards that ideal unity. That ultimate goal won't be easy, however, because as history teaches us since ancient times, the world of negative emotions like alienation and fear, and that feeds the need for power, will always interfere in any needs, for we are frail and sensitive human beings. Nonetheless, I still believe that SEADOM is an attainable dream, not so distant, I think, from here. And if we know what it can do for us as musicians and understand the subtle role we play in persuading politics to its righteous path. In this dream, SEADOM is a clearing to a better social order in Southeast Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us again. In the next 2 days, let us renew and build friendships, and let our hearts and minds be open to the beauties of our unique music cultural experiences. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much. Welcome to the university, and mabuhay.
International cooperation. Thank you, Jose, for those wonderful words of introduction, and also, and in particular, for your support in allowing us and enabling us to bring this, our 7th Congress, to the Philippines. It's wonderful to be here, and it's fantastic to see so many people with us, and more still on their way. This, as I said, is the 7th Congress. It's actually the first where all 10 nations of the ASEAN region are represented. And I think that's an extraordinary achievement. We're beginning to find that level of momentum, both within the music education field, but also, and I think at least equally importantly, and building on Jose's point, in the political field. One of the reasons for the organization to exist is for the arts to be seen and to have momentum in a region which is evolving all the time, but where understandably the focus might otherwise be primarily on economics. We are, as Jose points out, also involved in currency exchange, and actually if we can connect in at this stage so that the cultural dimensions of our diverse communities can be brought together in a meaningful way, which is also valuing the traditions of the diversity, we'll have a lot to show. This has been a week, obviously, with the passing of the founding Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and it's been fascinating to recognize how music has been brought in to that very important period of commemoration, of mourning, it's true, but also of celebration of an extraordinary life. Music really has deep meaning in this region, and we just need to make sure that it has the visibility at a time when many other things are also achieving momentum. This is also the first official meeting of SEADOM. What do I mean by that? It's the first time where our association has been formally registered, and this was, I would say, the singular greatest achievement of the last 12 months. I'd like to thank Joe Bowman and the team in Mahadon for their work over 11 months to get us this incredible achievement. There's quite an entertaining thing, I think, if you do a search on SEADOM on the web, which I hope all of you have done, the first thing it says, do you mean seldom? And I think that's an interesting thing we need to work through over this Congress, how in a context where we can only work on this project at a seldom level, how do we make the maximum impact for that work? But the second thing is that SEADOM now does turn up as the first thing you search when you put SEADOM, as in Southeast Asian Directors of Music, is the first thing that comes up on that search. If you'd have done this even 3 years ago, there was some sort of shipping company, I think, and there was a pharmaceutical company and several other things, and there was something in America. We're now in charge of SEADOM. I wanted to explore now several things. The first one was to look at what's been achieved over the last 12 to 15 months. Also, what the last 12 to 15 months might have brought to us by way of questions. I then wanted also to look at what our ambitions might be for this year and give some sort of overview of what we're expecting to see in the next 36 hours, and I should say particularly tomorrow, because this year we've tried to tighten things up so that there's a lot that's going to happen tomorrow. And I hope everyone will be clear as to what the ambitions for tomorrow are, at least by the end of this session. I promise I won't take till 5 o'clock because clearly the jeeps going around the university are also part of our cultural exchange. This is the 5th country that we've taken the Congress to, and I think one of our ambitions for the next, let's say, 8 to 10 years should be that we've covered all 10. In a sense, therefore, we are at a halfway point, and it's fantastic to recognize this. In terms of what we achieved last year, the Congress, I thought, was incredibly exciting. Up until last year, a few people had been trying to drive a vision for what this might be. What I felt last year was almost everybody who was at Mahadon for the event recognized what could be emerging. And as a consequence, we ended up with something which was perhaps almost too ambitious in its expectations. But I still think that's an incredibly exciting stage to have reached. What we now have to do is take that forward, empowering as many people as possible with specific expectations, opportunities, responsibilities, so that we can continue the growth and momentum from something which began as a very conceptual dream into something which begins to have sort of real direction. Now, one thing we did last year obviously was to establish, in fact I think we did this 2 years ago, was to establish the sub-themes that we might work with within the SEADOM environment at this stage in our development. What we did last year was to articulate those themes in more detail. Now, I know that you're not going to be able to see this website in great detail, but that is the website as it exists at present. It demonstrates, even in some of the photographs, that we've obviously had opportunity for cultural exchange. We've met together. There have been musical events which have involved students as well as leaders of the different communities. And we want to continue these themes on in the coming years. It's fantastic tonight that we have the opportunity to have a concert which brings together not only the players from the University of the Philippines, but also from other countries within the SEADOM group. And that's something hopefully more and more organizations can contribute to in future events. As the sub-themes emerge, it's likely also that there can be smaller events which might evolve during the year, not only at the Congress, which take forward energies that come out of those areas of consideration. I wanted also, therefore, to just share, in case people haven't seen how the website is evolving, and again, thank you to the office in Mahadon for their support in helping it evolve. I wanted to show you that each of these sub-themes now has articulated a set of 3 or 4 core areas of aspects that we want the sub-theme to take forward. Now, I know you can't see that, I can't see it, I can hardly see it on my screen actually, to be honest, from this angle. But it is there. It's very easy to find. You just type in SEADOM, you see SELDOM, and then you click on the first thing under SEADOM. And you can find these for each of the sub-themes. I would hope people might take a few minutes between now and tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock just to have a look at these. The presentations tomorrow morning from each of the chairs of the sub-themes is really only taking forward more or less what you'll see here, but it gives us an opportunity to remind ourselves of what we might be focusing in particular on in relation to each of these titles. So hopefully, if you can see that, you can then decide which of the topics might be of interest to you tomorrow. The entertaining bit of this was these were generated after last year's meeting. They were obviously generated still at a time when people were ambitious, because some of the things we said we'd do by this point in history haven't actually happened yet. But they may also be interesting to revisit tomorrow when we get the opportunity to discuss the themes in more detail as to what is realistic. The other aspect that I think is really critical and has become much clearer to us over the last 12 months, perhaps should have always been obvious, maybe was, that national representation in taking these international themes forward is of absolutely critical importance. There'll be all sorts of things where whatever we think of across the region, if we don't have ways of getting the momentum down into the national community and making it meaningful at the national community, we won't have the possibility, we won't make the fullest opportunity out of the potential that the organization has. Just at 2 very specific examples. We need to reach not only to the education community in order to have the advocacy dimensions, in order to make a difference. We need also to reach into the professions that our education helps sustain. And that's not just in performance, that's also in administration, that's in venues, that's in commercial organizations, for example, instrument providers, all sorts of different communities. It's often, for example, even in within ministries of defense, where there will be musicians being employed, and we need to make sure that there's an awareness as a community emerges across ASEAN that the musicians' development also matters. So there's all these dimensions where, at the national level, you will know better than the SEADOM office in Mahadon who the specific contacts or organizations might be that we can connect in to have an involvement with SEADOM. So that dimension is very important. The second is obviously also advocacy, particularly in a context where one of our greatest challenges is language. So at a very basic level, for example, we've just had our organization registered. We want that word to go out. We can generate a press release that says that. We can attach to it photographs that demonstrate that this group is very real and very meaningful. But the central office in Mahadon can't translate that into the various languages. If at national level we could work out ways to get that translated and also disseminate it, that would be incredibly helpful. Even if it's only that the contact point for the dissemination comes back to the central office, it will help us build a more meaningful communicative network over time. So I'm hoping that will make sense. In the past, we've tended to focus on thematic areas for discussion and have left national conversations out of this international forum. This time, we'd like to have some space, and indeed some important space, for looking at a national level at what some of the consequences might be of the development of an Asian economic community, of an ASEAN environment, and so on. And what some of the challenges might be in relation to each of the different communities. We're proposing that if a country is represented here by 4 or more people, that tomorrow afternoon there'd come a point where those people could gather together and look at some of the consequences of the discussions of the sub-themes in the morning through into the national level. For some countries, there aren't 4 people here. In those cases, we suggest we're going to try and draw together those communities, possibly into 2 groups for discussion and for sharing what the ramifications may be in those contexts. For this to make sense, we're going to need national representation in each of the sub-theme discussions tomorrow morning. So I've asked those who are the national representatives to use some of our more informal time in jeeps or around concerts or at dinner this evening to try and work out who might go to each of the 4 sessions at 9 o'clock or each of the 3 sessions at 11 o'clock or 10:30, I can't remember, each of the 3 sessions later on, so that we do have full coverage of what's being covered in the sessions. What's also important is not only that each nation knows or has given some consideration to what the consequences might be for that nation, but also that we, as a community, give some consideration and reflection on the different experiences in different parts of the region. So the final session tomorrow is actually an opportunity for a dialogue, for interactions where people can share some of the outcomes of their discussions. In reflecting on what maybe we could have done better in the past at these congresses, I'm quite clear that what we could have done better is to have recorded more precisely what happened. Not only more precisely, but also succinctly. In relation to the website, it would be great if we could give a brief report of the discussions that took place over the next 36 hours. And again, I've charged each of the sub-themed areas and each of the national reps to maybe generate 1 or 2 paragraphs only about what they thought were the core points in those fields. But even 1 or 2 paragraphs will end up with a 30-paragraph report, which will be certainly sufficient to give us some sense of progress. One of the things that's happened over the last 12 months is that the international community is becoming much more interested, both in this organization, but also in this region. So Joe went, for example, to Budapest to the Association of European Conservatoires, or actually I think they call it these days the European Association of Conservatoires, but anyhow, European Association of Conservatoires are in their title, which is also AEC, by the way. And that was a very successful presentation in that a lot of schools in Europe were fascinated to know more about what happens here. How will they know more about what happens here? Because they'll be able to see it on site when we direct it to them in future. It's already been encouraging to show that there's been activity and that there is that there are ambitions. What we now need to be able to show is that there's also reportage. So I just ask and remind people that that's a vital thing which we want to be able to have collated by Sunday. Not by next week by email, please, but by Sunday. Because in the past we've tried next week by email. It doesn't work. Next week by email, Mahedon goes on holiday. By the time they come back, somewhere else has gone on holiday. The second thing we're going to be aiming to do is that for the next 12 months we have clear plans for when we might try and connect. We've worked out at the EXCO level, for example, it's really helpful if we meet in a real space in January so that we can gather momentum for the event in March. We also have to be realistic about our targets and times. I mean, it's taken us 8 years to get to here. I know in the case of the AEC, who are now up to their 60th year, it took them 40 years to get to where we've got in 8. So let's not get too ambitious for what's possible, but let's make sure there is ever increasing momentum. Finally, I just wanted to say that, of course, a really vital part of what we do is to spend time with each other, to get to know each other, and therefore the informal network dimensions of what happens in the next 48 hours are really critical. We deliberately give a lot of time for that. As those of you who've been here for a few times know that we've tried over the last few years to have some sort of activity which is taking us out of the space and out of the committees, but just going and getting some experience of the community culture. And again, we're very grateful that something's been organized for Sunday morning, so that should be really fantastic. Can I just see who's here at a SEADOM Congress for the first time? Quite a lot of people. Okay. Who's here for the 7th time? 7th time. Sudbury, me, Joe, Anatai, Lily. No, 6 you are. Good. So it's interesting to see that momentum and flow. So we deliberately, as I said, been heading to different countries so that we can get to know what the contexts are of the different countries. We hope also that the different countries continue to make the connections into the future so that you get to know the region. This is a region which has traditionally been quite disparate, obviously, in terms of some dimensions of culture, in terms of some dimensions of politics. And this is the time when we can begin to draw those things together, also by celebrating what is valued in each of these communities. The last thing we want to see happen from an ASEAN perspective is that there's some sort of homogenization of culture. And that is a real risk. To be very honest, I've seen it a little bit, for example, in some of the workings of the European community, and that even despite the fact that the European Association of Conservatoires realized from the beginning of the development there that that could be a problem. So we do have a duty of advocacy in relation to helping change evolve in a way that is meaningful for music. Change is inevitable, and resistance to change is also inevitable. But there's a deep natural truth that change will win. Otherwise, there would never be change. There will be change in our community over the next 20 or 30 years. It's our duty, our responsibility in relation to music and to culture, that the change is in the right direction and is beneficial for the culture and the community that surrounds us. Wonderful to see so many people here. I'm sure there'll be more joining us in the next few hours. I leave it there at this stage, other than to thank Jose and his team, Joe and his team, for bringing us together, and to thank you all for making the effort to be with us over these few days. Probably the Jeeps await.
Yeah.
Please, Sir Jose, thank you. Thank you very much. Please.
I will announce a few things. The Jeeps are waiting for us. We will go to the central administration where the Chancellor of the University is waiting, and then we'll have a formal photo of our event. And then from there, I don't know where the Jeeps will go, but it's just around the campus, and it's just a small tour, okay? And then we'll be back here at 6 o'clock for the inspirational speech, and then the concert follows after that. And then two important announcements. Please do not lose this, put this around your neck all the time, because this is the card of entitlement. I mean, the food will be served because if they see us wearing this. Then of course, this also serves as the ticket for tonight's event. So thank you again, and welcome.